So thank you very much for having me here this afternoon. First of all, this is me. So this was my most recent Lumina Spark splash, which was taken in September 2021. I was first actually introduced to Lumina Spark in 2013, and my splash then, although it was predominantly the same, it was a little bit different. So my yellow was very much down. I was a commercial director of a training organisation at the time. And so I was very much focused on account management, delivering projects, that kind of thing. Now in my new role, much more innovative, creative. So my new splash sees that yellow moving up a little bit. So from December 2000 to May 2020, I was an employed consultant working on large leadership development and organisational change projects for many blue chip organisations, as AJ said, people like Heineken, BAE Systems, Airbus, Deutsche Bank, and EDF Energy, people like that. So travelling the world, delivering lots of exciting things with lots of budgets and exciting challenges ahead. In May 2020, during the first COVID lockdown in the UK, I joined South Yorkshire Police, and I now lead the organisational development and culture team. So as you can imagine, we look after organisational development and culture, but we also look after leadership development, talent management, employee engagement, our internal DEI, and also wellbeing. So quite a broad range of initiatives. So we're looking at how we can really bring the Lumina suite of tools to support all of those different areas for us. A little bit of context about South Yorkshire Police. So we're an organisation currently of about 5,500 people. About 3,500 of those are serving officers, and the rest are staff. So some of those are police community support officers, so PCSOs, and other people working in investigation roles, but predominantly that's sort of how we're made up. When I joined, I was quite surprised to find that we were still using MBTI as our assessment of choice. So I hadn't used that for quite a while in the corporate world, but it was still very much our assessment tool of choice. And we were also using the College of Policing's 360. Neither of those two things were linked, and neither of them would really be described as cutting edge in this particular day and age. So to remain functional as a police force, and I am going to use some jargon and acronyms, so I'll try and make sure I explain those as I go through, so forgive me for some of those. But to remain functional as a police force, we need to keep our cops in ticket, and that means that their skill set to be able to perform safe and lawfully as a police officer, their skill set needs to be kept up with regular training courses. So things like personal safety, advanced driving, first aid, firearms, taser, all of those things. And of course, that takes precedence for us as an organisation, because without that, we can't police the area of South Yorkshire. All of this means that we've got a really firm focus on our operational competence. That's the thing that really drives most of what we do. Over the last 8 years or so, we've also been on quite a journey. So because of the cuts in austerity, the cuts in police numbers, we've had to trim our budgets around learning and development. So as well as having that overriding focus on operational competence, we've also really trimmed down what we've done around leadership development, and we've focused it on the areas that we had to. So, for example, supporting our sergeants and inspectors through our National Policing Promotions Framework, what we call MPPF, because they had to hit certain things and provide evidence in certain areas. So we focused our leadership development on that, which of course meant we continued to promote people into new roles, but we weren't really giving them the skills and the signposts around what good looks like and what we expected from them in those leadership roles. So we developed a real imbalance between our operational competence and our leadership competence, which was providing us some challenges. Every police force is regularly inspected by HMIC FRS, which is not an acronym that rolls clearly, easily off the tongue, but it is better than having to say Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services all the time. And around 8 years ago, our inspection revealed some areas of improvement for us. So that led to the implementation of a new performance framework and a really highly directive, pace-setting leadership style of driving this from the top. We delivered the required results, and we delivered those results in a really quite outstanding short space of time. But as you can imagine, that had consequences and required an extraordinary amount of input and effort from our people. And the consequences of that were that people were tired and they were quite worn down by that. So hopefully that gives you a bit of context around South Yorkshire Police and where we were when I joined in May 2020. Prior to me joining, we had decollaborated our HR services department from a collaboration that was run between South Yorkshire Police and Humberside Police. So we now had our very own HR services team within South Yorkshire Police, which gave us the opportunity to really restructure that and move from a transactional model to much more of a transformational business partnering model. Although we obviously still support those traditional HR requirements as well. In the summer of 2020, we moved to PEQF, which is the Policing Education Qualifications Framework. One of the things that I reflected on this morning from Nick's talk was when he talked about what do people need to know when they join an organisation, and definitely every organisation has its own language, but policing is a whole different level, so it's like learning a completely foreign language. But the Policing Education Qualifications Framework was a new way of recruiting and training our police officers. It was brought in by the College of Policing, and it meant that we moved from what was affectionately known as IPPLDIP, which was our, and I can't remember what that one stands for because it was before my time, but that was essentially a 16-week course where we recruited officers in, we put them through their paces in the training school, and they went out into force within about 16 to 18 weeks, depending on when they were signed off. We moved from that quite quick churn model to running a 3-year policing degree apprenticeship and a 2-year degree holder entry programme. So a really elongated recruitment and training process that was supported with the Sheffield Hallam University. And my first role within South Yorkshire Police was as PEQF transition partner. And it was my job to go around the different districts and talk to response PCs and neighbourhood PCs, get them really, really enthusiastic about the opportunity to tutor our new students coming through this process until they were independent patrol status. Coming from 20 plus years in learning and development, I thought this was an amazing opportunity. So you can imagine my surprise when I sat down at these briefings and was met with sort of a wall of completely indifferent faces that had no interest in doing anything that I was asking them to do. And my real desire was to avoid, which is another thing that's quite typical of a police force, mandating this, because that's the easy thing to do. I was trying not to have to mandate it, to engage people on the journey with us, but it was quite a challenge. Attending those shift briefings really brought to life for me very quickly how different life would be working within a police force than working within the private sector. And on one of my first briefings with a response group, I was in full flow around how exciting the opportunity was, how it was their chance to leave a legacy for the next round of new recruits coming in through the Operation Uplift programme. And I saw a couple of them do this. And then they stood up and they left the room without a word. And I sort of just paused, wondering, is it something that I said? And one of their colleagues stepped in and just said, there's a body in the river. And I quickly sort of knew then that this was going to be a whole different working environment than I ever experienced before. And I've become quite used to meetings being interrupted or cancelled at short notice due to a live incident taking place. And it could be something that you might consider frustrating. But actually, for me, what it does is it highlights the amazing work that my colleagues do every day and makes me really proud to work for the police. And it's really why my presentation is entitled Ordinary People Doing Extraordinary Things. So as you can imagine, I had quite a low take-up of volunteers who wanted to be tutors. We'd achieved absolutely phenomenal results in those previous years, working to drive performance around a very quantitative framework. But inevitably that had led to over time of high levels of fatigue and lowered morale. We'd also had a reduction in police numbers at the time through austerity, and then, bearing in mind it was during the first COVID lockdown, you can appreciate how the resilience of our frontline cops had really been worn down over a period of time. At the same time as I was picking up those sorts of messages from going out and talking to cops, a few things were being highlighted within our internal performance audits, which were sort of going against our victim first methodology. So, for example, we'd find cops updating victims on progress around their cases late at night by text, because that was the first chance they got to actually get to that sort of task. So we knew that was, although those victims were being updated, it wasn't the best way of doing it, and we wanted to make sure, identify where we could make improvements. So we ran a cultural audit to do a health check on our culture across the force, and we presented this to our Deputy Chief Constable at the time. And he subsequently asked us to run a series of leadership away days, which we had to run in small groups. We really wanted to do a big conference, but of course COVID was really sort of taking a hold at that point. It was November, December 2020, and if you can remember, that was the year that Christmas was cancelled in the UK. So we had to run small groups due to COVID restrictions. And out of that came our From To journey. I'm not going to go through all of these in turn, because you can see them, and it would be very boring for me to stand here and read my slide. But one of the things that was really striking from the away days was that of all the people that we had there, and there was about 200, 250 people, so everybody from chief inspector level and above of the staff and staff equivalents came along to one of those days. And one of the things that was really, really telling was that only one person in all of those groups could confidently quote all of our 7 organisational values at the time. And that person confessed to having worked on the project team that defined them in the first place. Even more interestingly, though, those 7 values were on the bottom of our plan on a page, which you can see on almost every office wall as you walk around the force. But the truth was, they were just words. They were 7 very worthy words, but they were just words, and we hadn't brought them to life for people. So we knew that we wanted to simplify those so that they could live in the organisation. The drive around the performance framework had been very quantitative, so we also knew that we needed to reclaim the word performance. So again, coming from a HR learning background, I had a conversation in one of those leadership away days with a superintendent, and I started to talk about performance management in the context, in my mind, of having performance management conversations and how important it was to identify where people wanted to develop. As soon as the words performance management came out of my mouth, he jumped on it and he said, "See, you're putting numbers on it already." And it wasn't even in my head. It wasn't even a conversation about numbers. It was a conversation about people. So we really had to reclaim the word performance because it had become a little bit of a stick that people had been beaten with. We wanted to make sure that within South Yorkshire Police, that meant both being able to track our performance, but also the quality of the service delivery that we did. The intense focus on performance statistics had also led to some unhealthy competition. Some low levels of trust outside of immediate teams, some siloed working, and a blame culture was starting to creep in. And we could see that from the sheer amount of emails and people being copied into emails that was taking place. One of the things that I was surprised to find when I joined South Yorkshire Police was that there are 43 police forces in England and Wales, and they all operate slightly differently. Also within South Yorkshire Police, what I discovered was we had 4 districts and an investigative division. They all operated slightly differently as well. So it was almost like we had 5 police forces within a police force, and that really wasn't helping us as an organisation as a whole. So we wanted to create a truly collaborative, high-trust, high-engagement culture with accountability and recognition of the work that was being done, with consistent leadership behaviours across the organisation. And we know that culture is messy. I'm going to come on to that a little bit later. But one of the things that we're really fortunate to have, as far as organisational memory is concerned, is a really high number of people within SYP who have worked with us for 15, 20 years plus. One of the things that we knew was going to be one of our greatest challenges in this From To journey was having a high number of people within SYP that have over 15 to 20 years experience of service with us. So we knew that that was going to be both a blessing and a curse. So we started off by simplifying those values. And this is really a cornerstone of the journey that we're on at the moment to create a new culture. It's our new values and behaviours framework. We've focused on 3 values: fairness, integrity and trust. There's nothing innovative there for a police force in any way, shape or form. They've been around in our values for a number of years. In fact, we had first principles a couple of iterations of values ago, and they had fairness, integrity and trust in there as well. So nothing surprising, but what we did differently was we first put it in that order so that I can absolutely milk the word fit in all my initiative titles going forward. But we really defined 4 behaviours under each of those values to bring them to life and to provide a blueprint for consistency and accountability for people. And we spent a lot of time focusing on the words. So we wanted to stay away from that lengthy HR speak, and we've all seen them in values frameworks where in our previous frameworks we've had things like we work collaboratively with partners to deliver a service that, and you've got through a whole host of words before you even get to the essence of what it is you want people to take notice of. So we wanted to stay very far away from that, and we liaised with a lot of people around how we should word these things. So we've gone with things that we really will kind of know when this lands, when we start to hear these phrases being used in everyday conversations. And our aim is that you should be able to cut through South Yorkshire Police on any axis and see, hear and feel these values and behaviours living in everything that you observe. So our focus is internal, but with a very clear line of sight through to the service that we deliver to the people of South Yorkshire. And as I said, culture is messy. It affects everything and everything affects it. And so one of the things that we talk very openly about is that this is a classic example of a complex challenge that we absolutely need to tackle with courage. So where did we go from there? I knew that we needed to bring in a suite of assessment tools that would support our leaders in reflecting on their personal strengths and preferences and developing greater self-awareness. And although I knew how brilliant Lumina Spark was, we were spending public money, and there are some very stringent rules about how you do that, fortunately. So we had to run a thorough market comparison exercise to make sure that we were using the very best tool to get the value for our money. And I stayed completely out of this so that I couldn't be accused of influencing anything. But I was hugely relieved when Lumina came out on top, because I knew how invaluable it would be for us in terms of what we wanted to achieve. In September 2021, we launched our SYP Leadership Academy, which is very much, we have to keep saying this, it's a leadership mindset, not necessarily the role that you're in. And that had some very clear principles to help us on that from-to journey. So things like we don't have any courses that are designed specifically for officers or staff. So we're trying to break down those silos. We have different leadership programs at different levels, but everything else is designed for a whole host of different levels to attend as well. So this was designed to deliver our leadership development framework, which has Lumina assessments built in at all the relevant and appropriate stages as well. So in October 2021, we undertook training for our team as well in Lumina Spark, and then followed earlier this year by training in Lumina Emotion and Lumina Leader. So as I said, these are all built in at certain various levels and stages in our framework so that we're applied consistently and really help people on that journey. One of the challenges that we're hoping to address is the reliance that leaders place in the police on the rank structure. So it's almost like a get-out-of-jail-free card for some people, if you'll pardon the pun, in that some leaders rely on it almost completely instead of developing really good leadership skills. And you can imagine how it comes into play when there's a level of operational authority. There are certain things that a senior leader within the police will expect to say and have people do without thinking. If there's an incident happening, if there's a particular challenging situation or scenario, people have to do essentially what they're told in order to keep the public safe. So we had all of that working alongside. So due to the nature of what we tend to do, we tend to value outcome-focused behaviours and qualities over everything else. And I'd heard people say that had some different assessments throughout their careers, things like, I'm a red leader, I don't do the people stuff. And they were using it as an end point rather than a start point. So one of the things we had to start saying to people was it's not a badge of honour and it's not an excuse either. We're senior officer led, so people are very good in a crisis. You genuinely want these people by your side if things are going wrong. But because they're good in a crisis, they tend to let things become a crisis before they act, because that's when they really show themselves at their very best. And this is where the Lumina Spark 4 principles are really supporting us. So focusing people's attention on real reflection and increasing their self-awareness in the first instance, as well as valuing that diversity of strengths and preferences, building rapport and ultimately co-creating the results. We've also run many away days for intact leadership teams using the Lumina cards, the mat and the app, and we've built Lumina Spark into the delivery of our first line leader programme. As the second stage of the plan, which we're just implementing now, we're going to introduce Lumina Emotion, starting with our most senior leaders. And then finally, once people have had the chance to really reflect on the outputs of both of those, we're going to bring in Lumina Leader 360 to add to that situational leadership element. These are all the things that we're hoping to impact and measure as we go through. But ultimately, what we want people to feel happier, more engaged, for their well-being to increase, and for us to perform and gel together as an organisation much, much better going forwards. We're aware that some of these things may go up before they go down. So we've already received more emails to our listening inbox since we launched the new values framework at the beginning of May than we did in the whole of 2021. But these also create opportunities to address specific issues and provide us with lots of stories and scenarios for discussions with our leaders across the force. One of the things that I really love about the Lumina Spark process is the ability to sit down and go through their portrait on a one-to-one feedback session and the aha moments that brings. So I was speaking to a chief superintendent recently, going through his Lumina portrait feedback session, and he was fairly confident he wouldn't learn anything about himself. He was 30 years service, about to retire, one of our district commanders, so a very, very senior leader. And we were going through the different patterns in some of the things that he did, and we noticed that he had a very significant amplification around empathy. So his underlying empathy was very low, but his everyday empathy was really quite high. And I talked about how that was an amplification and how much energy and focus he must put into that on a day-to-day basis. And he had a real aha moment, which I'm hoping will really help him in his impending retirement, in that he said, that really explains why when I'm at home and I take a work call, when I hang up, my wife says to me, why can't you be as nice to us as you are to the people at work? I'm hoping that will help him in life beyond work. So we've got healthy use of the Splash app that we're rolling out, and some of our chief officers have even shared their QR code on the intranet for people to scan in. And conversations are definitely changing. So just yesterday morning, our independent ethics panel fed back to us that they're conscious of elements of language changing on the things that they're observing. And our chief has reported a deeper level of leadership awareness being apparent during our current superintendent's promotion process. All of the chief inspectors going through that have received their Lumina Spark portrait, been part of a Spark-based leadership event, and also had a one-to-one feedback session. So we're really thrilled with the impact of Lumina, and the fact that it's having an impact on our culture change is already being evidenced. In terms of where next, we're obviously going to go on and deliver our next levels of leadership development programs, but we're also looking at how we can bring this into other areas of the organisation. So we have, again, it's another acronym, and I apologise, we have TRIM assessors, so where we have officers who are exposed to trauma, we have trauma response management, and we're looking at how we can use Lumina Spark around empathy and Lumina Emotion around resilience to really provide support to our TRIM assessors and explore how they might be impacted and give them some self-awareness around that. We've launched a Sergeant's Development Programme, which has a combination of operational leadership, knowledge, behaviours and skills, and Lumina plays a really key part in that, and that will go on to impact how we change our promotion process. And we're also looking forward to using Lumina Spark Coach and the Journey to Composure as we develop our High Potential Future Leaders programme. So lots of exciting things in the pipeline. Oh, I'm going backwards, sorry. That's not helped, has it? And that brings me to the end. So does anybody have any questions?
Microphones will come to you very shortly.
Am I on? Yep. Sharon, hi. Thanks for the presentation. I'm just wondering, in a hierarchical organisation, how important the role of the Chief Constable was in helping you to roll out the programme?
It's absolutely vital, and we've been really, really fortunate that our Chief Officer team have really got on board with this. So we did an away day for them really early on. In fact, last October, one of our first away days was with them. They have, as I said, shared their QR codes. They are encouraging other people to do it. So they're holding other leadership teams to account to make sure that they're engaging with us around this. They're talking about it. They introduced it to a recent organisational business day where we had them all with the cards and with a whole host of their direct reports as well. So they're really embracing it and supporting it. And without that, I think it would be a much, much harder journey. Thanks, Phil.
Is it on? Hi, you knew I was going to ask a question. My colleague and I are from the Met Police. Really brilliant to hear all the work that you're doing. My question is, we work in an incredibly politicised environment where we are constantly under scrutiny from media. We have pressure from Number 10, the Mayor's office, etc. And I'm sure you're under the same kind of pressure. How do you keep your senior leaders' eye on the ball and not allow the work that you're doing to be swayed by the changing mood of the media and the politics and everything? Because that's something that we struggle with, which is this is long-term stuff, and we're working in an environment where everything is short-term incidents. You know, everything is a crisis, and the politics change daily.
Yeah, it's a constant challenge, and as I say, we are really fortunate that they're hugely on board with this. So they get it, they're bought into it. So that's a big starting point for that. I think there's an element of having to be persistent and really build that continuity and that consistency into things. So when we launch the values and behaviours framework, we have a tendency to just communicate about things once on the intranet and assume that everyone's seen it. We knew that we know that doesn't work because we know that a lot of people don't even look at the internet in our organisation, certainly not the frontline cops. So we knew that we needed to do something different. So we've got a 13-week campaign around that, which was the first week was around why, and then one behaviour per week. We're about halfway through now where we focus on just one behaviour a week and talk about how they can bring that to life and why it's important. So I think there's always challenges. There's always the pressures from the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office holding us to account for different things, and there always will be those conflicts of focus, I guess. It's part of my job to keep bringing that up to the forefront of their minds and showing them how if we get this bit right, a lot of the other things will start to fall into place a lot more easily.
And we've got one more question that was over here somewhere.
Thanks. Sharon, thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation and fascinating. You mentioned the fact that you do some vertical elements was that of the leadership programme? So you have different tiers of leadership, but you do some vertical elements. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit as to where you place that emphasis? Where do you keep people tiered and what do you allow to become vertical?
Yes, of course. So we are doing different leadership development programs at each level because, of course, responsibilities and what good looks like at each level is a little bit different. So we're maintaining that. But where we've got things like building resilience, effective communication, giving feedback, all of those kind of things, we're really marketing those really firmly as they are for anybody that needs to get involved in this. Part of that is because we've got quite a limited initial offer through that, and that will build over the next few years as we build more and more programs into it. So it's part of managing that need as well in the first instance, but also the value of having a department head, an assistant chief constable in a course with analysts and with forensic people and staff officers and people like myself is hugely beneficial. So we're just trying to be really clear in the marketing of things what people can really get out of them and having that very front of mind when we do the design.